Hey, it's Art from my new microphone. In today's video, I want to teach you how to get more control over the bass elements in your mix with a simple technique known as split frequency or multiband processing. So let's dive right into Logic Pro and get started. All right, here we are inside of Logic Pro to talk about split frequency or multiband processing, particularly on bass. In this mix, we will be looking at the bass guitar in the mix Wise Man by the band Lindsey Meisner and the Seventh Mystic. This album just came out recently. It's one that I mix. It's a local band here in Nova Scotia. I will leave links to that album in the description box down below if you're interested in checking it out. And right here, we have two bass tracks right here. If we zoom in, we can see that they are identical. So what I did was I had the multi-track for the bass. I duplicated a track and duplicated the audio file right here. So we have exactly the same thing. And then what I did was I gain staged both of them before getting into the mix. So I brought them down 4 dB each. And then in this track, I have my channel EQ, which is low passing everything about 100 hertz and down with a slope of 12 dB per octave. And then I did something a little bit differently in this case where I actually put the other EQ on the second one after all of the processing. But before we get to that point, I just want to show you that right here, I have a high pass filter with 12 dB per octave at 100 hertz right here. And so this acts as a sort of crossover point. And typically what I would have is this channel EQ all the way up here. And so right after my gain staging, that is where I would do the crossover frequencies right here. And so we basically have a crossover frequency of 100 hertz. You can see 100 hertz here, 100 hertz here, and then the crossover slope is 12 dB per octave. So the low control right here on the first track is going to be taking care of all of the low end energy, and there's going to be a little bit of overlap with the high end control right here on the second track, which is taking care of the high end energy, everything above 100 hertz. But of course, there is going to be this transition band from about 40 some hertz to about 250 hertz, where there's going to be a little bit of overlap between the two tracks. That is kind of par for the course when it comes to multiband processing in this fashion. We could opt to go much steeper with the slope, say 48 dB per octave, and I could do the same right here. However, the steeper we get with our low pass and high pass filters, the greater the phase shift is going to be between the two tracks. And so things can get a little bit phasey and messy at and around this cutoff frequency here at 100. Of course, we could use linear phase EQ, but then we get into a few other issues. I actually have a video going into much more detail on EQ and phase shift. I'll leave a link to that in the description box down below if you're interested in checking that one out. But for now, let's just keep these as they were at 12 dB per octave slope. So I'll change that and that. But that is the basic premise of having a split frequency or multiband control over the bass. Again, the first track down here in the mixer or in the arrangement view right here will be the low control, and then the second one is going to be the high control. So I could even relabel these bass low control or LC, and then bass HC for high control. You can see here in the high control channel EQ that I also have quite a significant boost, about 7 dB at around 2000 hertz. Now that's not part of actually splitting up the high and low controls. This is just an additional EQ move that I wanted to make on the high control that I figured I would just use in the same plugin rather than bringing in a second EQ plugin for that. So after our gain staging, which I also have a video on, I will leave a link to that one in the description box down below as well. We have our channel EQ, and then everything after these channel EQs is going to be affecting either the low control on this channel or the high control on this channel. Now in the actual mix, I ended up processing everything and then high passing this high control. But in general, I would have this right at the same point in the insert chain on both channels. So again, it's a little bit different in this particular session, but I just wanted to go through the basic premise where I would typically have it in the first part of the insert chain rather than at the ending. But in the case of this mix, again, this is how I did it. So if we go to the low control, we can see that I have the SSL channel strip right here with basic EQ and compression going on. And we see that I have very much the same thing going on on the high control right here. Now, because I am EQing so aggressively in the low and high controls, I can really keep a lot of this stuff the same because, for example, in the low control, this high-end stuff going on right here with the SSL channel doesn't really matter. Much like in the high control right here, a lot of this stuff in the low end doesn't really matter because, again, those are being cut off before or after these EQ moves are being made with the SSL channel. So a little bit of compression there on each of them. We have the same settings for both. And then after that, I have a bit more compression on each of these through the CLA 76. You can see that, again, it is very much the same control. So up to this point, I am very much processing them the same way. And then we see something a little bit different here in the high control. I actually put the Renaissance bass or the R bass from Waves, and this will help explain why the channel EQ is at the end of the insert chain. The Renaissance bass, what it does is it will take the fundamental frequencies below, in this case, 110 hertz, although we can alter this. Bring that back to 110, and it will produce harmonic content above these fundamentals to help give a little bit more presence to the bass. And so what I wanted to do with this R bass was to give a little bit more intensity to the high control, but in order to do so, I needed that low frequency content in the signal when this R bass was actually inserted in the chain. And so that's why I decided to high pass it afterward rather than before going into here, because if I didn't have that information in the low end going into the R bass, then the R bass really wouldn't do its job. And what I did with the Renaissance bass, in addition to having it set up, was I actually automated it. If we open up our automation window, in the breaks of the song, I actually brought this up so that the bass would get a little bit of a boost without me having to boost up the levels of the bass. And so I make the bass a little bit louder, but also a little bit more aggressive in these sections right here. If we have a listen out of the chorus into the break, you can hear what I mean. So it just helps the bass stand out a little bit while the vocals are not present in that break section, and then it tucks the bass back down for the verse 3 in this case. So that is the Renaissance bass in this case. And then right here with the Saturn, I have some saturation going on both. You can see that I'm doing quite a bit more in the low control, and this is to help bring out a little bit more of that first harmonic energy after the fact, once this has been low passed. And so based on the very low end energy, I'm bringing out a bit of that harmonic content, which would give a little bit more energy in the low mids in this case, which can help drive that bass and give the mix more power in the bass. So oftentimes we want to cut a lot of tracks in the low mids because this is the muddy range, and having too much energy built up there can really lead to a muddy mix. However, in the case of the bass, I wanted to add a little bit of energy there with a little bit of saturation on the very low end frequencies, just to give it a little bit more power. So that range is a little bit finicky. Having too much energy from too many tracks there will lead to a ill-defined and muddy mix. However, we do need energy there to give a little bit more driving force and a bit more power to the mix. So that's why there's a bit more saturation right here, and then not nearly as much saturation on the high control, because the high control already has that mid-range frequency, that presence for the bass guitar in the mix. Now, after that, I have a bit of limiting. So here's a big part of why the high control and the low control are so important, particularly on bass. In the mix, we really want our low end frequencies to be very limited and controlled. And so the biggest benefit I've found personally from using a high and low control is to have that consistency in the low end by using a limiter focused directly on the low energy right here. So whenever the low energy passes a certain threshold, it's going to be brought down by the limiter to make it much more consistent. And this limiter right here on the low control will only act on those low frequencies. It will not affect the higher frequencies, which are mostly concerned with the presence of the bass. So by setting things up with the low and high control, we can really control the dynamics of the low end, which can help it translate better from system to system, which have different resonant frequencies and all of that. And it can really lead to a better bass response in the overall mix. Now, I also put a limiter on the top end. And again, this is going to be acting only on the high end frequencies in the case of this mix. And then once again, I have this channel EQ for the high control right here. And then I inserted this gain control, which is another benefit of having a high and low control, is once I took this mix out of the mixing session and went to reference it in the car, on my stereo system, my earbuds and all that, I noticed that the bass response was a little bit too much. There was a bit too much very low end sub bass energy, which I didn't catch directly in my studio because I don't have a subwoofer. I then came back into the mix and I could just easily either bring down the fader right here, which I did a little bit, but then also for simplicity's sake, I put a gain plugin right here. So I know that in revision 1, in this case, I brought down the fader. And then in revision 2, I actually came in here, I left the fader alone, and then I brought down an additional 5 dB. So then when I would go and reference it on a system with a subwoofer and there was too little bass, then I would know, okay, I brought it down by 5, let's bring it up a little bit. Or if there was still too much bass, I would know that I could come in here and either add another gain plugin for that revision or bring this down to suit the song and make sure that it translates well from different systems that have subwoofers. So I hope that I've made a strong case for having a high and low control for the bass elements in the mix. Before we go, I can just quickly show you what these two sound like in solo so that we can get a better idea of what the low control and the high control are in the mix. So this is just the low end. Here's the bass together. And then just the top end. And back together again. And you'll notice too that these are both being routed to bus 2, which comes in as the bass subgroup right here. And then from here, I could go ahead and compress them both together to help bring them back together a little bit and glue them together. In this case, I just have a bit of EQ right here, a bit of dynamic EQ at around 1651, and then a bit of permanent EQ right here in the mid-range. I put this on after the fact just to help shape the bass as a whole in the mix. So now that I'm showing this may be a bit too much processing on the bass. I probably wouldn't go so heavy-handed if I was to mix this song over again today. However, when I did mix this song about a half a year ago to a year ago, I felt the need to put all of this processing on and to also, again, split the bass to a low control and a high control, and then to kind of finesse it once I got out of the studio and started referencing outside the studio. So that is split frequency or multiband processing on the bass. Now let's hop out of Logic Pro. All right, so I hope that you see and hear the power of split frequency or multiband processing, especially when it comes to bass elements within the mix. Again, it's important to have a nice tamed low end and then also to have a nice presence in our bass elements within the mix, and split frequency or multiband processing can help us with that. If you'd like to learn more about mixing, I do have a free mixing guidebook. It will be the first link in the description box down below. You can check that out, sign up to my newsletter, and I will send it to you right away. This mixing guidebook walks step by step through the entire mixing workflow to help you make the right decisions at the right time to improve your mixes. If you like this video, I will encourage you to hit that like button and subscribe here to the My New Microphone YouTube channel. We are just getting started here, and I appreciate all the support I can get. And if you would like to hang out with me more here on YouTube, I will leave a few other videos in the top left and right corner that you can check out for more information here at the My New Microphone YouTube channel. So with that, I would like to thank you again for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.